Even though it's only been 24 hours, you probably are already aware there's a new Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list. More so than any other news in the community, ban list news travels the fastest, so I'm sure by now you've already seen a ton of reaction videos or maybe discussion videos talking about these new changes. Konami put out an awesome graphic. Usually they don't do this. I think they have started to do this the past couple times, but in the past they haven't. Basically, they put out a nice little graphic that shows all of the changes. So Forbidden, we have Summon Sorceress, number 95 Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon, and the Phantom Knights Rank at Magic launch. In the limited category, we have Lady Debug, Phantom Skyblaster, and Skystriker Ace Kagari. Semi-limited, we have Super Poly going from limited to semi-limited, and unlimited, now from limited, is Miscellaneousaurus. So those are all the changes. There are not a ton of changes on here, just 8 of them, but they all make a pretty big difference on the metagame. It's going to shake things up a lot. Me personally, I'm not going to say that I've figured out the new meta. I'm pretty sure that all of the top decks will still be topping, just in different capacities. Sky Strikers, Salman Greats, and Thunder Dragons all receive direct or indirect hits on this ban list. However, I still think the decks are more powerful than the other decks available, so they'll likely still be the top 3 decks. Anyway though, in today's video we're not talking about the meta decks, we're going to talk about the rogue strategies. And in the past I've sometimes talked about the rogue strategies that are looking really good going forward, but what's funny about this ban list is that most of the changes were restrictions. The only non-generic unlimit on this list was Miscellaneousaurus. Super Poly is more of a generic piece of removal for a lot of different decks, but the only card that actually went off and changed a rogue deck in a positive way is Miscellaneousaurus. There's not enough to make a video. I'm not going to make a 5 rogue decks that were winners and just do 5 dinosaur decks. That doesn't make any sense. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the 5 rogue losers going forward in this new format. I'm not saying these decks are unplayable. I'm not saying they're terrible, but they've definitely been taken down a notch in power. At number 5, we don't necessarily have any deck in particular, but rather any deck out there that relied on one singular Summon Sorceress combo as its main win condition. Now in some cases it's going to be decks like Zombies or Warriors, which heavily relied on the power of Summon Sorceress, but in other cases it's just anything that mainly used that card for their big combo and now is lacking a win condition. Summon Sorceress is a very strong card. It's sort of along the same lines as Needle Fiber. Both of them are link monsters that special summon things from the deck, and while it is true that those types of cards can help out all sorts of strategies, where they actually end up making an impact is in the most competitive decks where they're doing truly degenerate combos. However, any deck that over the past year or so has adopted Summon Sorceress into its main strategy is now looking at a very awkward situation where they don't really have a solid replacement for it, at least not until Needle Fiber comes out. So if you're playing a deck where the only big combo that you were doing was including Summon Sorceress or relied on Summon Sorceress, you're looking at a pretty rough time going forward, at least until some new combo for your deck, whatever deck that may be, comes out to replace Summon Sorc. At number 4, you have any Cyber deck besides Salman Greats. Salman Greats will likely remain a top deck going forward. Yes, they're losing 2 copies of Lady Debug, but in the Salman Great strategy in particular, you have a variety of other options. First off, you have the already usable Flame Buffalo, but you also have Signet Mining coming out in Dark Neostorm, which is a very good reinforcement of the army that can load up your graveyard. Those cards aren't going to be as powerful though in just basic cyber strategies that really did need those 3 copies of Lady Debug to increase their consistency. You see, Salman Greats don't really care about putting cards in the graveyard. Flame Buffalo oftentimes starts your combos off by putting a Salman Great in the grave, and the same sort of thing goes with Signet Mining. You Signet Mining, discard a Salman Great monster, add Gazelle to your hand, trigger the Gazelle. Pretty big combos that you can do by putting cards in the graveyard. However, for the regular Cybers players, that players are just using normal Cybers decks, it's going to be pretty rough, especially if they're on a budget, because Signet Mining at this point is likely going to be a very expensive secret rare, even more expensive than if Lady Debug was still at 3 copies per deck. And I do want to point out that while it is true that right now Salman Greats are better than any Cybers deck out there, that might not always be true, especially in the future, and I think limiting Lady Debug right now really opens up a lot more card design space for Konami in the future, because it means that they can print more Cybers monsters and they won't just all have 3 copies of this normal summon Stratos that makes the consistency so much higher. At number 3, we have Cyber Dragons. Now, Cyber Dragons are a very popular rogue strategy, more popular than most of the decks that I considered under the category. For for number 5 on this list, and while it is true that Cyber Dragons are taking a hit because they lose Summon Sorceress, I don't think they're necessarily terrible. I think people will probably still play them. I'm sure Alex, one of the best Cyber Dragon players out there, will find some way to abuse the new cards, especially even without Summon Sorceress, but Cyber Dragons had a really good set of months. They topped multiple regionals, they topped a YCS, actually top 8 at that YCS, and overall losing Summon Sorceress does hurt that deck a lot. I mean, it's no secret that many of these Cyber Dragon combos do stem from Summon Sorceress bringing out a Cyber Dragon card from your deck because you have so many ways to get it to point to a machine monster, either on your opponent's side of the field or your side of the field. So I think Summon Sorceress for Cyber Dragons, more so than the other decks that I sort of alluded to early in this video, really hurts. But I do think Cyber Dragons probably have a better shot at still being competitive after this ban list, probably more so than any of those other decks that I mentioned, but it definitely will be a hit that is felt for Cyber Dragon players everywhere. At number 2, we have any deck playing Phantom Knights. Now, whether or not that's a pure Phantom Knight list, probably not though. It's probably more likely a deck that's teching in a small Phantom Knight engine with other dark monsters, and I think that any deck that's playing Phantom Knights, or that was playing Phantom Knights, really has to re-evaluate whether or not they want to keep that engine in their deck. Rusty is still one of the best Link 3 monsters out there right now. It is such an insane card. It gives you tons of advantage, tons of Link fodder, a back row card, but overall, a lot of times people were using the Phantom Knight engine not just because of Rusty setting back row, but because the Phantom Knights could search up the rank up magic that is now currently banned. I believe that the Phantom Knights will still be around in the metagame. I don't know exactly what decks will maintain those cards in there, but I think that anyone that was playing them is really going to have to ask themselves, do I really need to still play these cards? If you were playing them specifically for the Azathoth combo, obviously you're probably not going to play them going forward. They'll probably still be played in some decks, just not nearly as many decks as they're being played in right now. Losing rank up magic definitely does hurt the decks that were splashing them in as an engine, but overall the more pure Phantom Knight decks, which don't really exist at the moment, but at least for some players that are using a more pure version, those players probably aren't feeling this hit as heavily as people teching in the archetype as an engine. And that brings us to the number 1 rogue deck that I feel is by far the biggest loser on this entire ban list, maybe even more so than some of the meta decks, because all of the meta decks right now will probably still be top contenders going forward, but Blue Eyes, especially the Danger combo variant, is looking really rough in the coming months. And if you guys remember, that deck actually had some success at a YCS and regional level with the Dark Matter Dragon combo. People were doing all sorts of crazy things, namely summoning multiple Guard Dragon extra deck monsters in the same turn and turboing out a ton of other monsters, including a Morphage Goliath. However, realistically, that deck kind of fell off the face of the planet once Thunder Dragon players figured out that they could just play the Dark Matter combo instead. However, the deck was still and always will be a fan favorite, and it was pretty cool to see a completely new version of Blue Eyes topping events in droves, something that we haven't seen for years. We always see some Blue Eyes tops every couple of months, no matter what the format is, but this was the first time in a while that we actually saw true innovation happening within the archetype, just because a lot of the Blue Eyes decks over the years haven't changed that much, even with new support. But the Danger Blue Eyes Guard Dragon deck was pretty wild and pretty successful, but without Dark Matter Dragon in the format, there's basically no win condition for that deck, even more so than when we compare it to Danger Thunder Dragons, which still have Colossus, and they still have Hot Red Dragon Archfiend, and they still have Zombie Stein. And while it is true that technically the Danger Blue Eyes deck can make those rank 8 monsters and summon Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, they don't have the Colossus to back it up, and they also are not nearly as consistent as the Danger Thunder deck, so there isn't a huge reason to play Blue Eyes over those other strategies. I've seen a lot of people saying that losing Dark Matter doesn't actually affect anything because of the Hieratic Link monster special summons Goliath from the deck, but even looking at recent topping lists, people are still playing Dark Matter and the Hieratic Link in the same extra deck. It is true that special summoning Goliath straight from the deck or hand is a pretty cool ability, but it comes out at 0 attack instead of 2750, which is a pretty big deal. But more importantly, I think in terms of consistency's sake, one of the reasons that Dark Matter Dragon was so powerful, and one of the reasons that the Danger Thunder Dragon deck was so powerful, is that even if you drew the quote-unquote brick cards like Archbrave or Goliath, you could just discard them with the Danger scavengers, you could send them to the grave with Dark Matter Dragon, whichever ones you didn't draw, and you could just still special summon that Goliath during your opponent's standby phase. However, in the case of the Heretic Link, it doesn't special summon from the graveyard, so if you draw the Goliath in the combo when you still have to summon danger monsters to dig towards that Skull Dread or dig towards those baby Chaos Dragons, if you accidentally discard that Goliath, and now that you don't have Dark Matter and Archbrave anymore, the Heretic Link monster can't special summon that Goliath, and that definitely hurts your overall board state. And of course, in the Thunder Dragon deck, if they're still going to play the baby Chaos Dragons, which I very well assume they would, they're still going to end on a Floodgate extra deck monster. They're going to end on Colossus, whereas the Blue Eyes deck isn't going to do that if they happen to draw the Goliath and they can't summon it with the Heretic Link. If you're comparing the Blue Eyes deck, it's always going to end, hopefully if it combos off, on things like Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, and it's also going to end on maybe Zombie Stein or Hope Harbinger. But if you look at the Danger Thunder Dragon deck, or what people will probably play in that deck, it's going to also end on Colossus, regardless of if it draws that Goliath or not, where the Blue Eyes deck really can't afford to draw that Goliath because that's their only big Floodgate monster that prevents your opponent from breaking your board and pushing through your negates. Anyway though, hope you guys enjoyed today's discussion video on 5 rogue losers from the April 2019 Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list. Feel free to let me know in the comment section which rogue strategies I missed that actually were hit directly or indirectly because of this ban list. I'll see you in the next one though. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.